It's your game night. How much work are you doing getting things set up? Are you digging out the terrain, setting everything up just right, collecting the correct miniatures from your collection, bringing them to the table, setting everything up? Or are you bringing out notebooks for everyone so they can keep track of the adventures through paper and pencil, perhaps providing them with a visual map to work from? Or are you working completely in the void of imagination, in the open and infinite spaces of the minds of your players and yourself? Hi, I'm Jonathan Albin, a game master with 5 decades behind the screen, who has established a more than 12,000 year storyline that my players have been involved with for decades. So, what I am here to do is provide you with information on how you can make your games excellent. If you are looking for that kind of information, make sure you click the buttons below and subscribe and become a part of our community at NycosRPG over at, well, I stumble over my words sometimes. Check out our Patreon account at patreon.com/Nikos to become part of our community. There, that's what I wanted to say. Alrighty, so we are talking in particular tonight about the methodology for the role-playing game experience that you engage with your players. And many of you are familiar with Dungeons and Dragons and generally use the tabletop mechanism for general role play, which is to say you have maps and you have a script or a module that you're working from where you are gathering that information and sharing it with your players as you move through the story. But have you considered theater of the mind? Now, the concept of playing within the theater of the mind is, in one aspect, liberating, and in another, sort of catching you in a kind of a forced feedback loop. And that is to say that as you describe the scenes and the situations for your players, they in turn respond back through feedback, asking questions and developing clearer understanding of the setting, scene, and such. And when we speak of theater of the mind, I tend to add the concept of the engaged mind, because we have a history, if you will, in our country of telling stories in such a way that you expect the person that you're telling the story to passively pick up what you're laying down, as the saying goes, by providing them with the narrative in such detailed terms that they are going to be accepting anything that they cannot visually see, and therefore aren't expecting to interact with the world. It's kind of a flat process. I'm reminded when I was a youngster, my dad was in sales, and almost always, I suppose a little bit like the characters in Tommy Boy, my dad was a glowing storyteller, and he would state the details of the story only to the extent that he wanted them to see what he was saying, and therefore was able to, surprise them or get them to get the getcha moment, so to speak, in the story by providing some unclarified detail that suddenly brought the story back into their minds in a more alive way, because they were actually then at that moment visualizing. And when I speak of theater of the engaged mind, what I'm referring to is building a story with the idea that the players have an inquisitive tack already built in, that they are looking for certain information. So as you recite these details to them, they are at one stage collecting the data and plugging it into the places they expected to have answers, and then at the same time they're developing the list of questions about the details so that it's a conversation instead of just a monologue. And what I'm going to talk about in this first section is really talking about the concept of elemental focus. In the older storytelling mechanisms, you were holding back as the storyteller the details of elemental focus specifically for the big reveal at the end. And while that's useful in that relating of a story and to drive points and such, it's not as effective in a role-play environment because the other players aren't able to interact with it. So instead of focusing on that, you're developing the story by keeping your eye on what you want to focus on and being able to relate the details that were undelivered when the players require that information in the game. Sometimes I feel like I talk down, and I don't mean to do that. So if you feel or experience that, realize that the situation is that I earnestly want to share information with you, and perhaps I just haven't developed the mechanisms to do so. So as we go forward, be aware that the purpose for this is to for you to gain information. So if there's at any point you feel like I'm missing the point, make sure you put a comment in the comment section, because that way I can revise my processing so that I'm providing that information to you more clearly. Okay, so when we talk about theater of the engaged mind, we're talking about providing everything that the players need in a narrative form so that you're not establishing the reality by number of spaces on a map or number of squares on a grid for the players to have to calculate. Instead, you're giving them generalized terms and letting their brains process the rest. So, for example, what does totem cost? Totem fundamentally costs some level of detail, but only in a validation mode. That is to say, if a person is responding to a theater of the mind prompt and you provide the information that they're at the range of a hurled weapon, that's not very specific, and as was pointed out by several of my players, that hurled ranges can be varied over a certain range. And to my thinking, when I say that something is of a hurled weapons range, I'm meaning generally you could throw something at them and be accurate. And players sometimes don't know how to respond with that. So what does totem cost? It costs a level of detail. So the players are definitely going to be in a more abstract position. But this also refers to the ability for the players to react more intuitively, because nobody's getting out a tape measure, and I'm hard-pressed to know people who can detail out verbally, I'm going to wait until I'm 32 feet from the enemy before I throw my knife, or I'm going to loft my javelin just when they get into 62-foot range. That we don't mentally think that way, and so therefore theater of the mind loses that level of detail. Further, totem tends to cost the precision of knowing exactly whom you are throwing an object at. If you are throwing at weapons at a hurled weapons range and you don't know who's downfield, you may be hurling something at an ally and you won't be able to tell because you've lost the discrimination of your targeting, because you don't know who's in that that place downfield. So it may cost precision. And the irony is that the mechanism is so free flowing and so fast as a response that it manifests more benefits than it costs right on its face, because you're not having to convert your energy of the scene into measuring spaces on a board. Pardon. Wow. The other element that Totem is going to cost is the lack of appreciation for your great paint jobs on your models. So some game masters will bring out models even if they're not utilizing a range scale or a grid map marker, just because they're visually appealing. And that's not a problem, but it is something that you sort of give up when you are running a game in the theater of the mind, because you're not gaining the benefit of the miniatures visually. But on the other hand, you're able to create a better personal description for the being, so that your players can independently create their own version of it in their heads based on your description and their perception thereof. What are the benefits of Totem? Well, the first benefit of Totem is that there's less preparation. You as a storyteller certainly have to have an idea of where things are happening, what the size of the buildings are, how wide the roads are. You have to have that all in your head. But once you have established the physical location, then the turn resolution is quicker, because you're not having to pull out the measuring stick or the laser for determining line of sight. You're just determining it and adjudicating it. Now, I've watched several videos by other game masters who take that and say that it's a manipulative tool by the game master for him to control the game. But it's really more about providing the players with the resources for their creativity to take over and add to and amplify the scene experience right from the top. And from my standpoint, the benefits of Totem also are of more rich role play, because your distances aren't that particular, and players can sidle up closer to an enemy in narrative without the NEP being any the wiser. There's a lot more fluidity in the scene, and I would love to have that conversation with you. If you're a game master who prefers miniatures, I'd love to hear your reasoning for it, because to me, I'm trying to lift away the concept of game as mechanics and think of in terms of game as general collective term for the play of the scene. And so therefore it's going to be modified, if you will, by that. Go right past that. Do want to mention Nycos lore is available at NycosRPG.info, NycosRPG.info. You can gain bits and pieces of the lore of Nykos from behind the scenes as an element at that website. And also to remind you, if you want to be part of our community and find out what's going on within the stories, check out our Tuesday broadcasts, Tuesdays at 11 p.m. Pacific time. I do reports on the world of Nykos. All right. So what are the features of Totem? The first feature of Totem is that it is a much more intimate form of role play, because we all have to see the scene in our minds, and therefore there has to be more interaction for that to be the case. So the level of intimacy in the role play is improved. My mouth today is enhanced through theater of the engaged mind, because you are conversing more about the scene to make sure that it's clear to one another. Second feature of Totem is that it's much faster in terms of how we determine actions and responses, and the players need far less prompting once you've established the scene. To move from one place to another within the scene is easier and faster, and there's more direct interaction between the players, the actors in the scene, and the observers in the scene. The third feature of Totem is that it is easily replicable when discussing the scene after the fact, because everyone was on the same page about the setting and description, and if it wasn't, there can be clarification made so that the scene is replicable in terms of describing it or even writing notes on the subject. The fourth feature of it is that the emphasis is on the actual role play, and thereby the players can gather more information and collect more useful data from the engagement, because they're not having to also track how many feet away they are and whether you've got line of sight or whatever. You're eliminating all of that in favor of giving the players the opportunity to add persona names and setting situations in the way that they collect data, and therefore session over session, Totem does provide them with a more clear picture of what's happened in each scene. And the final feature of Totem compared to the others is that it's really a matter of the players choosing the setting, the scene, or whatever, and then the game master providing the details to fill in the narrative picture of where they are, so that it's not a one-sided narrative, but instead it's a conversation as they go along with it. Okay, so when we come down to it, there are game systems out there that have used it in the past. There are those that use it currently, and there are those that will use it in the future. And the unique selling position, the reason why I've chosen to operate NycosRPG in the theater of the engaged mind, or Totem, is because it's the world, and not as I see it, but as we see it. So the players in the story are every bit as important to the narration of the story as the game master is. It's useful for the game master to have a clear idea of where he wants to describe or do his action, but when the players make their actions clear, then the game master can reframe the engagement within those parameters to make it more a choice by the players how the scene will play out. And really, the idea of the engaged mind is so powerful that the unique selling position is that the players, both the storyteller and the cadre of adventurers, are responsible for a clear understanding of each scene, and therefore it's a more intimate way of play that really is serving the playing community considerably. So finally, when we talk about the idea of theater of the engaged mind, we've talked a lot about what the benefits are for the game master, because it speeds things up, makes it more fluid and such. But what are the player benefits from theater of the mind? Well, first of all, it gives them considerably more agency in every scene, because they, as the players, are giving you, the storyteller, as much feedback into how the scene is being played out as you are as a storyteller. So it gives them much more agency. It also gives them a more visceral feel to the scenes, because they are actually, by narratively defining the location and the scene and the conditions, they are the ones that are also helping to make it make sense, which of course I've always said is the real key to role playing. So when you are looking at theater of the mind, also consider that it is going to provide you as the player more capabilities to keep track of what's going on in the scene, because you're not forced to be a bookkeeper and a model mover and all of those other physical details. Instead, you're just playing through the narration of the engagement, not only for your benefit but to your particular level of detail. And if you are, the more detailed you are, the more narratively precise these scenes can be. Alrighty, so in the end, this episode ironically falls pretty much right on the heels of the episode that I recently did on conversation. And theater of the engaged mind is itself a shared language. When you have an understanding of when somebody says something's at hurled range and you understand what that phrase means, you have an understanding of how much time you have left before you have to interact with them in a physical way. It also provides you with the opportunity to build the story collectively so that the world is no longer the game masters, but it also, in essence, is the players who are involved, because it's as much their vision as it is the storytellers. I want to thank you for being here today, and we will continue to do episodes like this going forward. I want to thank you for being here, as I said already, and I will see you in the next episode. Remember, we do record 10 a.m. and 11 p.m. Pacific, Monday through Thursday, and Friday mornings as well. So I'll talk to you soon.